Number 60, Trumbo. Hollywood blacklisting during the Red Scare hasn't been the subject of many films, which is surprising given the insight into the world of movie making that Academy voters usually love. So I was interested to see how this film would handle the story of one of the most prominent names in the whole scandal, screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. And for what it is, I think it's pretty good. It does run into some of the stumbling blocks that biopics like this have a tendency to feature, going out of its way to mention famous actors and movies from the era to remind the audience that this is all connected to some of the names they remember and love. Also, the pacing is a little uneven, with long periods of high emotion peaking and then continuing on for some reason. But overall, this really is an enjoyable movie. It's well written, as it should be, and the acting is great. Bryan Cranston is definitely the MVP, but the supporting cast has more than their fair share of good work. Helen Mirren is in typical top form as the sweetly sadistic Hedda Hopper, Diane Lane and Elle Fanning hold their own against Cranston in some of the film's more intense scenes, and John Goodman is downright hilarious as a volatile B-movie producer. This movie will probably prove more rewarding for those who have seen some of Dalton Trumbo's work, but anyone interested in the golden age of cinema or the blacklisting scandal should find plenty of enjoyment here. Number 59, Trainwreck. Both romantic comedies and R-rated comedies have become pretty reliant upon established formula in recent years, so when something comes along that breaks up the monotony, it's nothing short of refreshing. But what's so unique about this film is the way it incorporates the cliches of the movies it's satirizing and points out their absurdity while still giving into their influence. At times this does make it hard to tell what's parody and what's sincere, so it almost feels like the film has become the very thing it's mocking. But this is always followed up by a wink to the audience to let them know that something other than what they expect is coming up. Trainwreck sports a fair amount of heart as well, with surprisingly touching turns from Colin Quinn and Brie Larson. Amy Schumer, who also wrote the screenplay, shines in her first outing as the lead with a well-balanced mix of deadpan comedy and dramatic pull. And I can't say enough about Tilda Swinton's scene-stealing performance as the chameleon-like actress transforms herself fully into Schumer's intense and unpredictable boss. In summary, this is a little uneven and a bit too raunchy for most viewers, but very funny and a real treat for the thick-skinned. Number 58, Dancin' It's On. The term "so bad it's good" is dramatically overused these days, which is sad because every now and then something comes along that truly deserves this badge of dishonor, and none more so than this movie. It's totally understandable if you've never heard of this because it was independently produced on a microscopic budget, but somehow this film found its way into 600 theaters, and for that I am eternally grateful. Basically a step-up sequel with somehow even less story, laughably bad dialogue, and pointless attempts at jokes that only serve as buffers between well-choreographed but wildly improbable dance sequences. Centered around the burgeoning romance of two teenagers in their late 20s, this movie tells the timeless tale of love that can only be shaken by complete stupidity or any minor inconvenience. It can be repaired by literally any gesture, meaningful or otherwise. I had a blast watching this, due in no small part to the complete lack of irony. If there was even a hint of knowing self-send-up on the part of the filmmakers, this merely becomes contemptible disaster piece mimicry. But all is made in earnest. Director and choreographer David Winters believes in this film wholeheartedly, and for that, I can't fault him. The dancing is impressive, and the rest is impressively awful. See this as soon as humanly possible. Number 57, Krampus. Blending genres is a tricky proposition. If you lean too heavily into one or the other, you risk alienating fans of the genre that gets less attention, and trying to split them too evenly can leave the audience unsure how to feel. This is most prevalent in horror-comedy mashups, as the general emotions of each seem to be at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Krampus further complicates this matter by being a Christmas movie, which comes with its own set of expectations, but miraculously, this film pulls it off. The humor feels natural and serves both the plot and the character development. The scares are well crafted and often defy genre stereotypes, and are really quite intense given the film's PG-13 rating. But most importantly, this is a genuine Christmas movie. Instead of just being a horror film set at Christmas time to provide easy set pieces and dialogue, the beginning of this film would play just as well if it were at the beginning of a drama or a straight comedy, and the opening credits depicting the worst of humanity's greed that often bears itself around the holidays would feel perfectly at home accompanied by Art Carney's Night of the Meek speech from The Twilight Zone. One problem I do have with this film is that it focuses on the son in the family played by MJ Anthony, who was really good in Chef last year, but I just found the character unlikable because of the mostly flat performance. Now this isn't a knock on the actor, who as I said can be very good, but he probably needed a little more direction, especially given the veteran cast around him. Other than that, I really like this movie. Give it a try if you like something a little darker in your holiday season. Number 56, Cop Car. Grappling with complex ideas like the meaning of life or the miracle of self-awareness can be an enticing challenge for filmmakers. At its best, this kind of film can transcend the normal limits of the medium and become a singular experience. At its worst, it can become pretentious and incomprehensible garbage, which is why it's so refreshing to occasionally see something that appears to have started out as a simple idea translated to the screen. Someone asked one question: what would happen if two kids stole a police cruiser that belonged to a dirty cop, and just worked from there? This makes for engaging storytelling because there's no conclusion that the characters are forced to arrive at. They're simply acting and reacting to the situations at hand. So the audience has no idea what their whole agenda is. We learn bits and pieces of information by seeing them. It's classic show don't tell filmmaking. Now, as for the events that actually do transpire, they're mostly pretty simple and even a little dull. There's very little action, but when it kicks in, it's intense because, again, we've been given no clues about where this is headed. Now, this does make for some uncomfortable moments as the two leads are so young, and seeing them in such frightening predicaments might be a bit too much for some viewers. While I'm talking about them, I should mention just how good these young actors are. Director John Watts does an excellent job of letting these boys act like kids and not just tiny adults, which often happens to child actors, and Kevin Bacon does solid work as the corrupt cop in question. All in all, not a bad way to spend 88 minutes. Number 55, The DUFF. I was initially opposed to this movie with what I thought was a righteous anger. The mere idea of what the title suggested was insensitive and insulting, so why would this be something that I'd want to watch? But after seeing it, I realized I was guilty of the very thing I thought I opposed. I judged a book by its cover, or more accurately, a movie by its title. This isn't a film poking fun at the people who don't fit the description of beauty prescribed by society. It's instead a deep exploration of self-worth and acceptance, and at every turn it does the best to challenge expectations. Now, it's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination. It borrows more than a little from teen comedies of the 80s and 90s, which makes it quite predictable in certain areas. But there are a number of great original ideas contained here, especially in the portrayal of the protagonist. The tired trope of the mousy, quiet single girl who goes unnoticed because of her silence is jettisoned, in favor of the outspoken but intentionally asocial Bianca, played brilliantly by Mae Whitman, who's alternatively heartbreaking and hilarious. This character is usually written off as comic relief in these sorts of movies, but here she takes center stage and is given real depth and pathos. The film takes a stab at some current issues like cyberbullying and social media, but these don't resonate as strongly as the simple discussions between characters about the things that really matter to them, perhaps because these seem more timeless. Still strike a chord with anyone who felt like an outsider in high school. Give this movie a shot. I'm sure glad that I did. 54, The End of the Tour. Let me start by saying that I'm not familiar with the work of David Foster Wallace, so I can't judge this film as a representation of the author's ideas or philosophies. I can only judge it as a movie, and in that regard, it's pretty good. The plot is about as simple as they come, a journalist interviewing an author, and the actors are given nearly free rein to explore the respective characters through simple conversations about everything from fast food to dogs, and more intellectually challenging exchanges about the existence of God and the nature of addiction. The closest approximation I can make to this film is Richard Linklater's Before trilogy, where the focus is the relationship between two characters, and all the dramatic tension in the film is derived from the words they say. This sort of film works well as an acting showcase because there are no distractions from the performances, and both of the lead actors do fine work here. Jesse Eisenberg is tasked with carrying the story as reporter David Lipsky, finding an uncomfortable energy as a would-be novelist fighting insecurity and a small amount of jealousy and envy of his successful subject. But the highlight here is Jason Segel, doing career-best work as David Foster Wallace. Playing a literary virtuoso with inner demons that rival those of Van Gogh or Hemingway, Segel switches effortlessly between a childlike sense of wonder at the most visceral of delights and imposing anger at what he perceives as the slightest offense. It may not have the widest appeal, but will surely impress those who give it the time in some way. Number 53, Everest. Okay, so I didn't see this in IMAX or 3D, so I have no idea if this film takes on a whole new life in those formats, and all I can offer is speculation about their merits. I'm grading this solely as a standard viewing experience, so with that in mind, I think it's pretty solid. It brings a lot of realism and honesty to the characters and forgoes the typical heroics usually associated with such stories. There are also a lot of fascinating insights into the motivation behind the death-defying pursuit of what to some might seem like a frivolous and even idiotic accomplishment, exploring the minds of some of the world's biggest adrenaline junkies and recognizing that their justification for their actions are just as valid as our reasons for any endeavor, life-threatening or not. The extreme environment is used to full effect as every step feels grueling and every misstep feels like an express journey toward oblivion. The movie loses some steam in the last third as hope dwindles and it becomes harder to accept that everything is not going to be okay. I applaud the film for this bold approach. All the same, it's hard to watch, and a scene of sweet sentimentality near the end feels a bit overplayed. Unsurprisingly, the acting is top-notch, as one of the most talented ensemble casts of the year is on full display, giving the real-life inspirations for their characters the respect they deserve. There are very few man versus nature stories this large in scope, and even on a standard movie theater screen, it's impressive, though I'm not sure if it's enough to make the film an enduring success or simply a solid but forgettable entry in the genre. This is definitely worth your time if you're in the mood for something on a grand scale. Number 52, In the Heart of the Sea. I was looking forward to this movie for a really long time. I first saw a trailer for it in December of 2014, and at the time it was expected to arrive in March. But then the announcement was made that it would be pushed back until awards season. This only served to fuel my excitement for its release because at the time I hoped it meant that the producers felt it was strong enough to contend for Academy consideration. But having seen it, I now understand that it was moved back to allow time for some changes to be made. Most notably are the scenes of a young Herman Melville learning the story that would eventually become Moby Dick from a survivor. These scenes benefit from the talent of Brendan Gleeson and Ben Whishaw, but suffer from an almost tongue-in-cheek setup that makes me feel as though the producers didn't trust the audience to be smart enough to know that this is intended to be the true story behind Moby Dick and not an adaptation of the novel itself. Plus, the addition of these scenes makes the main story feel rushed, as time had to be allotted for them in the editing process. So the film was directed by Ron Howard as a straight representation of the story with no framing device or narration, but had to be converted into what it became later on. This makes for frustrating viewing as the scenes involving the whalers and their exploits are thoroughly engaging, but are constantly being cut short. There are more positives than negatives here. The visual effects are great and the acting is strong throughout, but the few problems are significant enough to be noticed. A year of anticipation made this a bit of a letdown for me, but if you're just now hearing about it, you'll probably enjoy this movie. Number 51, Black Mass. True stories about organized crime make good movies. There's something naturally enthralling about the depths of human cruelty, and knowing that what you're seeing really happened in the name of greed just holds your attention. This is probably why there are so many of these films, but the shock value of these stories starts to wear thin the more you see it. A healthy dose of Martin Scorsese movies can render nearly any attempt at a similar project inert and make it feel pointless. So it's no small task to take on something like this. Without bringing something new to the formula, it's very likely the whole film will be branded a cheap imitation. In a number of ways, Black Mass suffers quite a few of these pitfalls. Narration via confession spoon feeds information to the audience that could just as easily be communicated by watching the events unfold. And surprisingly little time is actually spent with Johnny Depp's Whitey Bulger, and Joel Edgerton's decidedly less interesting FBI agent is basically a co-lead. But the overall effect of the film is greatly elevated by the performances of all involved. Depp is intimidating and commandingly personable in alternating frequency and brings a great deal of nuance to the part. The supporting players are strong and well cast, and I understand that Benedict Cumberbatch has made about 100 movies in the past 3 years, but I really wish he could have been on screen a little longer. Final thoughts, not nearly as good as some of the better films in the genre, but still worth a watch if it caught your eye.